Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Rowing Chat. This month on Row Perfect we've been focusing on psychology as a topic to review, and our Rowing Chat guest this month is also part of that big picture. Hello, who are you and what do you do?
Hello Rebecca, hello everyone. I'm Kirsten Barnes. I'm formerly a rower for Canada and competed at 2 Olympic Games, the 88 Games and the 92 Olympic Games. Was a member of the Canadian Women's 4 and 8 at the 1992 Games that won gold. And after that summer, I went on to do a PhD in sports psychology at the University of Bristol in the UK. So I became a mental performance consultant, which I currently do to this day. In the UK, I worked in the field of sports psychology and for Lane 4 Management Group for about 10 years before we moved back to Canada in 2007. And I now work for the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific as a mental performance consultant. I work with Rowing Canada, and I also work with a few other sports and individuals as well at the sort of national team level.
Fantastic. That's really, really great. What's so particularly special for us is that you understand rowing. We obviously know how special our sport is, but equally, I think that when I'm considering club level coaches, athletes and coxswains, that psychology is often the last part of training that people delve into and start to learn about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still an area that we're exploring more and more about and how to bring it into our daily training environment, as opposed to even just thinking about it in the context of, oh, when we get nervous in racing, it's like, well, what can we be doing every day in training just to make us that little bit better all the time? So in fact, it is something we can be considering on a regular basis. And you're right, it's interesting that we don't often go there, but I think it's gained a real positive perspective in the last 10 or so years, and or maybe more now, and people really sort of embrace it as part of their development at whatever level of rowing you might be at. It's something that we can all do a little bit of all the time.
So in the light of that, what I've decided to do is to ask Kirsten actually to do a slightly different format Rowing Chat. Instead of just me questioning and passing your questions on to her, what I've asked her to do is to start by giving us a tutorial in the groundings of what comprises psychology and how we can apply it to our regular sporting lives. And so to all the listeners, please, if you have questions, either hold back until the second half, or if you put them into the text chat, I'll make a note of them, but we won't be asking them of Kirsten until after she's finished telling us about sports psychology. Great,
thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, so the place I wanted to go was to talk a little bit about this notion of mental toughness. And while the word toughness might not be the best word, it's sort of the word that gets used in the sports world, but you might think of it as resilience or determination. But I was very fortunate about 13, 14 years ago in the UK to be working alongside Professor Graham Jones at Lane 4 Management Group and two other of his colleagues who did a piece of work which was actually entitled, "What is this thing called mental toughness?" That was the initial piece of research. And he was really curious to get out and talk to world and Olympic medalists and champions, so people who have been there and done it, to find out more about this notion of mental toughness, both from a definition as well as what are some of those key attributes that are believed to make the successful performer. And you know what? Success at any level. These are almost life skills as much as they are high performance, athlete skills as well. So that's what I thought I would share with you today. And so the slides that will be presented to you, I'm going to talk to briefly. And as Rebecca suggested, maybe there'll be some questions that pop up as a result of what we go through. So the first slide, mental toughness, the definition, was basically a sort of a key opening point for Graham's work, where the definition that came out of their work very much focused around the fact that we can develop this. There's a portion of it that's maybe naturally inherent in ourselves, but the key thing is that we're not born mentally tough. We can, in all of us, we can develop a sense of mental toughness by focusing on the attributes that I'll come on to in a minute. And then another area looked generally and specifically at different areas we can develop mental toughness in. And I guess how I've translated that into sport, or into how I deliver these messages, is the training environment versus the competition environment. So while both are, one sits on top of the other. I mean, they work together. Equally, there's things that are unique about a training environment and a competition environment. So, for example, in the training environment, we show up, whether it's multiple times in a day or a few times a week to train. Our motivation, especially as a sport that's has high volume periods where there's not much racing. We spend a lot of months training, way more months training than we do racing. So being able to get to a place of quality work when we're training and really manage our levels of motivation through the training environment, where basically you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, for goodness sakes, we sit on our bums and go backwards up and down lakes and rivers, and the same actions being repeated over and over again. So how do we stay motivated and focused and really energized, and the quality of what we do so that we are improving all the time is there. And then the second bit is the competition piece, which is when we get nervous and when we do feel pressure. Hopefully it's an excited nervousness, but we do feel under pressure to perform. And it's that one-off chance to get it right, where you can't put your hand up to the umpire and say, "Oh, I had a bad day today. Can we just do it a little bit later, or come back tomorrow and try again?" When there is only one chance. So to me, that whole notion of handling pressure is key in that competition time. And while everything I'm going to talk about falls into both training and competition, I just want to highlight the subtle differences we might see within the training environment and the competition environment. And that was basically what came out of the definition through Graham's research. So if we go to the next slide, I'll start this sort of bit of a journey on some of these attributes that came out of Graham Jones and his colleagues' research in the early 2000s. So the first one I'm going to touch on is self-belief. And you'll see that there's two clouds there on the slide that are there to sort of define what, again, when the athletes were discussing self-belief and the qualitative research looked at what was being said, these are the two things that came out. So this unshakable belief in your ability to achieve competition goals, and also this unique qualities and abilities that make you better than your opponents. So those are the key two definitions that came out in support of self-belief. And I suppose for me, self-belief really is at the heart of all this. If we genuinely believe in all the work we've done and everything that's got us to where we are, then we will manage all the other attributes of mental toughness really, really well. So the big thing is, how do we create this unshakable belief? And I hear it all the time from coaches and from athletes. They need to believe in themselves and they need to have better self-belief. And so I'll often go back and say, yeah, but how? How are you going to do that? And the way I do it with the athletes that I work with is we grow evidence. So every day there'll be something good about the day, even if it's not a very good training day and you finish the day and it's not been the way you want it to go. I will challenge everybody to find one good thing about the day that they can write down. So if we are keeping really good training logs and training diaries and looking at the stuff that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, what we did and how it went, and then noticing good things from every day, we will slowly grow over time our self-belief. And it's tangible. It's real stuff that's happened every day that you've now built up over time, that when you go to the starting line of any regatta, you can say, hang on a minute, I've done all this great stuff behind me. Yeah, sure, there's blips here and there, and there's times when the training didn't go exactly to plan, but look at all this great stuff that's happened. And that's what you take in your mind, everything you can do, you take to the starting line, as opposed to, oh, I wish I'd done a little bit more here, or what if that was a little bit better, and worrying about the negative or the things that we haven't done. It's that 80-20 thing. 80% of what you're doing is actually pretty amazing. 20% might need work. And when we get into that negative headspace, the challenge is to acknowledge the 80% and not get hung up on the 20%. And I'll often say and believe, by the time athletes get to the Olympics, nothing's ever perfect. And sure, we see some amazing days, and we do get a small percentage, I reckon, of Olympic performances, and with the Winter Games just finishing, that are perfect on the day. But most often than not, I'd say medals are won, not on the absolute perfect performance. So it's 98% of what they're doing is amazing. 2% could still be better, and the worry is people get hung up on that 2% rather than, or 5% or whatever it is, but rather than all the great stuff that really is sitting in them ready to go. So over time, being able to keep really thorough, but whatever, it's very personal, the whole training diary log thing. So keeping information that makes sense to you, that represents the good stuff that you're doing all the time. And that is how we can slowly start to grow self-belief. If we move on to the next slide, is motivation. And again, 2 points here that were highlighted in the research to describe motivation. So this insatiable desire and internalized motivation to succeed, and the ability to bounce back from performance setbacks with an increased determination to succeed. So both are very much related to how we set goals for ourselves. And that's probably the biggest area that I'll focus on with athletes around motivation is, well, first of all, creating purpose and intent. And I think one, again, like I've said already, one risk with rowing, it being a high volume endurance repetitive sport, is that we show up to training for training's sake, and we forget to think, what is it I want to get out of training today? What am I working on today? What would, if I leave the lake and I think, that was a really good workout, what do I want to have happened? And honestly, I believe it's about a 10-second conversation with yourself. You might go to the coach and have another 10-second conversation with the coach about what you want to focus on, or what you'd like some feedback on while you're on the water or while you're on the rowing machine. But being able to create that sense of purpose and being mindful, I think being present in our training and knowing what it is that we're working on as we begin really helps to get us through some tough workouts. And it really helps us manage that sense of quality of what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So while I usually would never question a high-performing athlete's internalized motivation to succeed, because at the end of the day, I think, we all are incredibly internally motivated to want to row and train, but it's the quality of that. And if we can look towards creating purpose and intent in what we do, then that's really important. And then sitting kind of above all that that purpose and intent might relate to like process goals. And then sitting above that, you've got your measurable performance targets that you can work towards, whether it's weekly or monthly, or phase by phase in a training program. And then of course outcome goals, which are sort of, what do I want to achieve this season, and usually related to racing, most often not always in our control, because at the end of the day someone might be faster than us in a race on a day, but hugely outcome goals, I believe, are hugely motivational and inspiring. This kind of what lives in our heart and in our backs of our heads, what kind of gets us out of bed in the morning, because it's exciting to race, or I hope it is anyway. And we do all this training to allow us to race. So holding on to those outcome goals kind of deep in our tummy or heart or back of our head, I think is important. But we need to remember the how bit. So how am I going to achieve that outcome goal? What steps am I taking every single day? And little steps, usually chunking big goals down into little goals to help me achieve that ultimate outcome. And of course, when people have setbacks of whatever nature, usually injury or illness, that deep-seated internalized motivation really rises up as you return to rowing, return to a boat, because you've obviously had some time off and away from the sport, and usually quite keen, often too keen sometimes to get back. But you often will see huge motivational desire when people have had a setback and have had to step out for a period of time and then return. So that's a little bit about motivation. The next slide is handling pressure. And again, so this is key. This is really important particularly on a competition side, whether it's even sometimes this internal competition that you might be doing pieces side by side, or perhaps a selection race, or of course going off to a World Championships or Olympic Games. The biggest thing, the two bubbles there that highlight handling pressure, are thriving on pressure of competition and accepting that anxiety is inevitable in competition and that you can cope. And I'll often, share a story that I was as nervous for my first Canadian trial 10 years prior to my Olympic final in 1992, but my whole perception of those nerves had changed. So I'd gone from being nervous and scared to nervous and excited. And it took a period of time of me learning that as an athlete, how I was interpreting those nerves, and really learning to thrive on it, because it never goes away. You think when you've made it to a certain level, oh, it's going to get easier, or I won't be so nervous, and it never happens. It gets harder. The better you get, the harder it gets, and you're just as nervous. I mean, from the neck down, I had all the same physiological responses. I used to call it, or I still call it jelly legs, when you get the sort of sensation in your legs that you can't feel your legs and you don't think you can row, and learn to interpret that in a way that meant my body was getting ready to race, and then that was a positive thing. So with the athletes, really looking at different ways to have really effective coping strategies, whether they're mental coping strategies, physical coping strategies like our warm-ups. We can really underestimate the importance of a warm-up, on water warm-up and off water warm-up, just to get our bodies ready, to get things activated and ready to go. And then our behavior as well. And I'm a big fan of routines and being able to help athletes, even if they don't like the word routine or they don't like the word planning. Everyone ends up figuring out for themselves how they like to get ready to race. And again, racing could be a day where there's internal competition going on, or selection of some sort, or at a big competition. So what do I like to do? 3 days out, 2 days out, night before, morning of, the day of racing. What time do I like to get up? What do I like to eat? And as I get closer to the start time, just mapping all that out. And if I figure all that out for myself, then I feel calm. I have a greater ability to feel calm and to feel familiar with how I prepare. So you can be anywhere in the world doing your sport, and you stick to your routine. You know that it works, and it helps you prepare for the competition that lies ahead, or the start that lies ahead. So I'll look at that under the handling pressure. We'll also spend time, I think, that whole idea of how we interpret the pressure around us, whether it's a race or something that's going on with a teammate or something. So our whole ability to appraise and reappraise, or frame or reframe moments that are going on around us, because it's never going to go away. So how we interpret the pressure is really, really important. And in fact, if we do a really good job of interpreting, we still might need some coping strategies, but the effectiveness of those coping strategies is way better because you've framed things in a positive way. So I had all the same routine, and as I said earlier, from the neck down felt the same as I prepared for my Olympic final, but my whole frame of being nervous and excited and bring it on, I'm ready for this is great, meant that my routine and everything that I had in place was just way more delivered, way more or executed a bit better. It was delivered better. And that's a pretty exciting place to be. And also the last thing I'll say about handling pressure is, we can talk about all as well, going to a place of dealing with the things that are around us that put us under pressure. So being able to go to the source of stress or source of pressure that might be putting you under stress. And sometimes it's a difficult conversation between an athlete and coach, or staff and athlete. Whatever it might be, it may never go away entirely, but if we can look at ways to reduce it, then sometimes our whole appraisal and the coping strategies don't even come into play because we've gone to the source of pressure, dealt with the situation, and we've moved on. So those are some ideas perhaps around the handling pressure piece. The next slide is on focus. This was another key area that came out of the research. So there's 4 components there on the slide, but 3 of the 4 really basically focus talk about dealing with distractions. So what distracts me? What happens when I get distracted? And how do I overcome those distractions and move on effectively? So that'll be a lot of the work that I would do with athletes around just being able to identify what happens when I get distracted, whether it's in training or whether it's in a race and I get too externally focused and I'm looking too much at the competition rather than bringing the focus back into my boat and my race plan. Of course, unexpected things happen. How do I refocus myself when there's been, a couple of false starts and the start time to my race has been delayed by 20 minutes and I'm now on the water? What am I going to do? Which again comes back to routines and plans and knowing your warm-up plan, having a backup warm-up plan in case there's delays, whether it's on the water or off the water. Because inevitably, whether it's weather-driven or circumstances, there can be unexpected events that get thrown your way. And what you notice is that it takes away our focus. And when we're nervous, we often end up getting distracted by really unnecessary, unusual things. We start noticing things around us that have got nothing to do with what we're trying to do. In fact, in another sport, I had a rugby player once tell me where people were sat in the stands that they noticed during a line out. So I said, so you weren't focusing on when the ball was coming in then? So when we're nervous and we're in that, we let ourselves slip into that bit of a negative headspace. We get really susceptible to letting our focus get quite broad and noticing unrelated things around us. And sometimes equally we can get much too narrow and we get really, really internal and end up overanalyzing, overthinking, overfeeling everything that's going on in our body. So like all these things, it ends up being a bit of a balance between picking up on the right cues and using them to our advantage and not getting too and noticing how we're feeling, but not letting that get too consumed, in terms of our performance. And then there's also a point there that says able to switch on and off as required. And really, again, I think there's a lot more work being done and being talked about from a bioneurofeedback perspective, or biofeedback and bioneurofeedback, and really, really starting to emphasize the importance of being able to switch off. I think certainly as high-performing athletes, their days are pretty filled up with training. There isn't a lot left anymore in the day to do other things, which means our nervous systems are charged, they're activated for long periods of time through the day without any kind of downtime. And sometimes, when we have downtime, you're off running errands, you're going to the grocery store, you're going to a doctor's appointment. And so it's being able to find time, particularly during the training environment, but also as you're leading into competition times, to switch off and have means by which to do that, whether it's through little devices that you can buy for biofeedback, maybe even a bit of meditation. I know a lot of athletes doing yoga now, just being able to integrate some of those calming, peaceful types of activities and really switching the head off just for short periods of time during the day, I think is becoming more and more important. So that's a little bit on focus. The next slide is dealing with physical and emotional pain. And really, I think rowing is a very good example of this one, because you're not too far into a rowing race or into even a training session when fatigue kicks in or the lactic acid hits and you're really hurting. So that being able to push back and through the pain while maintaining technique and effort in training and competition, I think is a huge one for rowing, as it directly applies. And I certainly know for myself, as I got tired in a race or a training session, my lower back would slump and my shoulders would come up to my ears. So I would often have postural checks, and something we talk about in focus is having focus cues. So specific words or short phrases or things that can remind you of what you need to do, actively remind yourself of what you're working on or what you need to do. And so I often had a sit up, shoulders down call because I knew that my lower back would be slumping and my shoulders would be creeping up. So being able to have those cues and push through those pains, and really that pushing through comes through training and pushing the limits and the boundaries that are set in the training environment. They're there for a reason, to help you race better and faster. So being able to rehearse all of this stuff in training is really, really important, because it has a direct transfer over to race day. Being determined to carry out what you know you've got to do. So again, that internal determination to have the goals and stay focused and to keep working towards what you're ultimately aiming for, even when you've experienced some failure. Because as I said, most experiences are not perfect. Most of our sort of trajectory through a high performance sport life is not a nice sort of steady upward incline. It has dips and troughs and things we've got to work ourselves out of. So being able to work through, whether it's failure or just feeling like you haven't achieved the goals you set out to achieve, and adjusting them, using the people around you, like your coaches and other support people, to help do that is really important. Don't feel alone in the process of trying to achieve your goals, because everything's changeable. Everything should evolve and move you forward as an athlete as you get better and address the things that you need to still work on. So that's a little bit on the sort of dealing with physical and emotional pain. And the last one is, the last slide is lifestyle. And 2 points here. So managing your personal life and finding that balance and having other things to do. So balance in heavy semi-quotes there, because it rarely is a balance, certainly in high performance sport. I think you really want your sport, you want rowing to outweigh the other things that are going on in your life, but that doesn't mean you can't have other things happening. So it's a means of getting out and thinking about, well, what keeps me happy, healthy, and sort of sane in my full-time rowing life, or if I'm balancing some rowing with my job or with school, what things need to be true and in place for me to be happy. And a number of countries, and Canada's just got a program started called Game Plan, which are really supporting athletes in this area in terms of athlete career planning while being a full-time athlete, as well as the whole transition piece when it comes time to move on from your sport and do other things. And that applies to any level. If you decide to back off on your rowing for a bit and pursue other things, it's a little transition in itself. So just being conscious and aware of what makes you happy and the things that you can do around your rowing life are really important, because it just gives a little bit of perspective on something that is really important to you. So that's a bit of an overview of I guess what I speak to as a mental performance consultant in my world. I say to the people I work with, if we kind of tackle these 6 areas and in the period of time that we're working together, whether working for Olympics or World Championships, and that I feel that we will cover the bases. I mean, you can read lots of books, and the same language will be used, the same principles will be there. So depending on how you couch the concept and how you define it, but basically, I like to hang my hat on those 6 areas and believe that if we work on all those as athletes, as coaches, that are definitely moving in the right direction and developing our mental performance in rowing.
Kirsten, that's a fantastic kickoff. Thank you so very much. And just for the listeners, the detail of Kirsten's actual slides we'll put up on our SlideShare account afterwards. Kirsten, all we put was the headlines up, but the bubbles will all be there for people to review. Now, our sponsor for today's Rowing Chat is Space Saver Rowing. They're the maker of the world's best oar and scull hanging racks. Is your boathouse full? Would you like to free up space for more boats and equipment? One hanging rack takes 16 oars or sculls. The equivalent space of a horizontal oar rack with 6 shelves is 2 metres vertical storage, and in that you can get 64 oars. Cambridgeshire Rowing Association installed these racks, and they freed up space equivalent to racking for 5 more single sculls. Go to the RowperFect shop and look in the storage and racking section for more detail. Right, now back to the questions. So listeners, viewers, if you're ready to ask questions based on what Kirsten has covered off in the first part of Rowing Chat today, please put them in the chat window. Meanwhile, we'll get on with answering some of the questions that were submitted in advance by attendees when they booked their ticket to Rowing Chat. So the first question comes from London, from Nicholas at Vesta Rowing Club, and he asks, why ahead of a race do so many people feel so nervous, and often that they would rather be anywhere else?
When I hear that question, it reminds me, I mean, we're all sort of guilty of it, but it's very true. And I can remember sitting on starting lines and wondering what I was going to have for dinner that night. Thinking, this is probably not the best thought to be having right now. And again, what brings me back to the moment that I need to be in is my routine. So I would check my oar lock, check my foot stretcher, make sure my water bottle's bundled up in my t-shirt and it's not going to roll around. So bring myself back to the moment with things. Sorry, so I've jumped ahead in terms of answering that specific question. But the reason that happens, at the end of the day, the reason we get nervous is because we care about what we're doing and something's important about it. Something's at stake probably, which is all good. And that's why we get nervous. It's important to us and we care. On a flip side, we could also sometimes feel nervous because perhaps we haven't done all the things we need to do to prepare. And so we're feeling uncertainty or out of control of the situation that we're in. So that equally can bring a sense of nervousness or about a performance. But ultimately, if we've done everything we can and want and need to do to get ready to race, then it's positive. I mean, it's because we care and this is important. And so that's why when we say thriving under pressure and thriving in the moment and embracing being nervous is really important, because it's not going to go away. It's always going to be there. So how can we make it work for us, make it work to our advantage, and take all that wonderful nervous energy and put it down the end of an oar to make a boat go fast? It's all in how we frame it and how we make sense of our perception.
That's such a good example. I love it. It reminds me of a lady with whom I used to row, who always used to declare very loudly when the coach said we're going to be seat racing for crew selection. She'd always say, "Oh, I love seat racing." And I always suspected that this was 50% her just being brash and trying to intimidate the rest of us into thinking that she really enjoyed it, and 50% her encouraging herself that she had prepared and that she knew that she could perform adequately.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is, if you choose to do any sport, if you choose to row and be competitive, there's always going to be an element of some kind of comparison and racing each other. And why not get excited about it? It's kind of what is fun about rowing as well, is racing and making a boat go as fast as it can.
I totally subscribe to that point of view. Now, our next question really is on a very similar theme. Lena from Buell Bridge Rowing Club, also in the UK, has said, how do you approach pre-race jitters?
So again, this is probably where I come back to the whole routine side of things and why it's so important. So again, if we accept that those jitters are never going to go away, so what can I do to prepare myself that I trust and I've done before, and it's a little bit of a process that I step into. And routines are never set in stone. They have to be flexible. They have to be adaptable, kind of like what I said earlier about the fact that, the weather can change and there can be delays to stuff. So we have to be adaptable in that routine process. But having a routine, but within that routine, again, I come back to things like breathing and just how do I calm myself down? How many minutes do I want to sit on the rowing machine or go for a short jog just to blow off some nervous energy and get my system activated and ready. So as we learn as athletes and as coaches what the best way is for me to prepare, to trust that, do it, tweak it, do it again, and over time we figure out what those little things are that really help us manage those jitters, because they aren't going to go away. And in some races end up being, for whatever reasons, they're a little bit less important, or you just feel differently at them, and that's fine. And then there's other ones where suddenly you feel way more nervous. So I think it's knowing yourself. I mean, couched within all of this mental toughness stuff is self-awareness. And if the more we get to know ourselves and understand how we tick, especially through logging, through journaling, keeping a diary of some sort, and understanding the good days, the not so good days, what I did well that day and what still needs to be worked on, then the better we are at handling those nervous moments and dealing with those jitters.
There's a very nice anecdote told by Ben Hunt Davis when he was on Rowing Chat with us, that he was always sick before a big race, just always. And he tells the story about how the day of the Olympic final in 2000, the bus had to stop for the whole team on its drive to the lake so he could run out of the bus and throw up into a bush. And everyone went, oh, thank God he's done that, because now we know we're on track.
Absolutely. And it's funny how those moments become that part of people's routines, and the positive side of it, like so that's a brilliant example of a whole interpretation that's been made good. Like, this is a good thing, we're ready for this, as opposed to, oh no, what's going on? And probably because it's happened a few times before. So that's why when we're doing these things, we're aware and we're paying attention to ourselves and our teammates, because it is a team sport. We are getting in a boat with others, and it's good to know a little bit about each other's ways in which we deal with pressure, so that it all stays in a good place. Yeah.
So moving on to a question from Patrick, who's from Cambridge University Women's Boat Club. I'm guessing he's a coach, because he asks, what are strategies for increasing self-confidence?
Mm-hmm. So I didn't make the distinction between sort of confidence and belief earlier. So confidence is very state-driven. So we can be in different circumstances, different environments, and sometimes feel very confident and sometimes not, often depending on what's being asked of us and whether we feel we have the skills, the tools, the capacity to do something. So confidence fluctuates pretty much daily sometimes. So we can really notice those ups and downs, whereas self-belief is more at our core. It's more related to self-worth and maybe self-esteem. So when I say to people about growing our self-belief based on the confidence moments that we have every day. So in terms of building confidence, I'd still come back to this regular daily acknowledgement of what's gone well. And it's not the fluffy stuff. I mean, tangible, proper, your blade is entering the water better today, and this is why. So the feedback that the coach can give the athletes, very tangible, real stuff that the athlete can then go away and go, oh, okay, so that's better, and that's what that feels like. Right, I'll keep doing that tomorrow. And that's confidence. I mean, that's slowly growing belief every day by noticing those moments that happen where confidence is they're doing things to grow their confidence. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
But they're slightly different, yeah. So I think in the world of coach-athlete sort of dynamics, and again, it's not to be, fluffy about it, I can't think of a better word, but tangible, real stuff that they do well, the athlete does well, and the athlete acknowledging that and hearing the good stuff and going away and noting that, and then being able to come back the next day and repeat that good stuff while working on other things as well, obviously. Slowly is acknowledging confidence every day and slowly growing belief.
I have a question for you. When I'm coaching, I will usually talk to the crew before we go on the water about the outing, and I'll plan, and then afterwards I'll do a debrief. And we'll stand in a circle, and I will usually say something like, right, I'd like each of you to tell me one positive thing about the outing. And I notice time and again that people find it incredibly difficult to actually do that. Firstly, they can't say one thing, and secondly, they can't just stick to the positive and then let their teammates speak. Why is that?
Well, this is what I think sport is riddled with, and it's amazing, and I'm guilty of it too. I mean, I know where my head would go, and I think it's just, I don't know whether it's a human nature thing, but and I have the same experiences. So, I say to someone, they tell me something good from today, and I'll just get this blank look and I'll just wait until they say something, because there will be something good. I think it's the perfectionist tendencies in a lot of athletes, at any level, wanting to get better. It's the desire to want to get better, and we believe that getting better is by focusing on the stuff that needs to improve, which is absolutely right. Of course, that's part of it. But there's this flip side of getting better is also being able to repeat the good stuff that you're doing, and acknowledging and noticing what's good about stuff. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I just think we just don't go there often. And so I think that's brilliant that you do that, and it really emphasizes the importance of noticing what went well from today and what can I take away from that, as well as the next morning saying, okay, this is what was good about yesterday, and this is what we're going to work on today. Anyway, so it's sort of a funny phenomenon, and we all see it, and I just think we're not used to noticing and commenting on the good stuff enough. Mm-hmm.
So there's a training element from the coach's point of view to keep the athlete focused, and it's okay to actually stop someone and say, no, I only want to hear one positive thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes athletes, it's hard to even say anything, like learning to put into words what you're feeling and express stuff. It's not easy for some people either. So just the notion of being able to reflect and speak, and then even go away and make your own notes to yourself and just capture the day in writing, mm-hmm. closing the day off, are all really good sort of behaviors to do as a coach and as an athlete. Yeah.
That's great. So moving on to our next question from Mike at Marlow Rowing Club in the UK. He says, how to help athletes to improve their confidence?
Well, I think it comes back to what we've just been saying. I think if you can encourage the athletes to either, as you've highlighted, after a session to stand together and make those comments about what was good about the day. But equally, if you don't do that they go off and think for themselves about what was good. I mean, again, if you wanted to monitor that in some way, you might ask them to come back the next morning with 2 things that were good about the day before, so that they have to go away the night before, the afternoon before, and reflect on that and pick out a couple of things. But I think the discipline to go away and think about some good stuff from a session, not just what didn't go so well and what you still need to work on. Definitely don't ignore that, but it's just add to that the good stuff. I mean, I like to use a 3-to-1 ratio thing. So during the winter training months, we look at 3 things that I need to work on from the day, and 1 thing that was good from the day. And at least every day I'm capturing 1 good thing from the day. Then as we get closer into like a trial period or into more competition time, you might flip that around. So every day I'm noticing 3 good things from the day and 1 thing that I need to work on. So for the athlete and everybody who's always trying to get better and always looking for the things to improve on, we're always acknowledging something that we need to work on, but we're mapping that against the good stuff, more good stuff than the stuff we need to work on. Because at the end of the day, you want to go to the start line believing in yourself and believing this is what I'm going to do. This is what I know it's going to feel like. These are the split times I'm going to aim for, or whatever it is, and the stroke rate I want to hit. You want to go in and deliver what you've prepared for, not be worrying about what you haven't done yet.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's just such a good ratio, and I love the balance of, as you say, winter training, which is where we get fit, where we learn our skill, and summer training is where we deliver against that winter training.
Exactly. Yeah. I never ever want to not acknowledge the fact that we have to keep working on stuff. I mean, it's just par for the course. You're always going to be. I mean, I was always working on stuff, even up to the start of our Olympic final. But my focus was more on what I knew we could do rather than what wasn't quite right.
Yes, that's really, really good. So our next question comes from Elizabeth, who's in Rochester, New York, USA, from the Pittsford crew. And she asks, I've got that wrong, sorry, it's Kerry from Bryanston School. She says, how to get people to understand what working hard is, that it isn't a bad thing to make their muscles hurt.
Well, I think if you're scared of making your muscles hurt, you should find a different sport than rowing, because as we know, it's part of the process. I mean, I think it has to happen in training, doesn't it? I mean, you have to be working hard in training and pushing the envelope in training to understand what the body's capacity is, and if people are scared of that, they're, dare I say, possibly in the wrong sport. But it's part of what we do, isn't it? And I guess on the rowing machine, I guess we're looking for opportunities to help people, encourage them to push and show them, again, I guess it's from a confidence perspective, that they can go to that point and go a little bit beyond, and oh yeah, I'm okay then, I have recovered and I can go do it again. But it is, yeah, it's working on a mindset that it's okay to be in pain. I guess it's that dealing with physical and emotional pain. It's being okay with that. And it's hard until you go there, isn't it? You need to go there and feel it, and then reproduce it time and time again to get, I guess, a sense of not comfort in your body, but mental sort of comfort, knowing that that's what it's going to take and that's what it's going to feel like.
So the question then is, you see people who are skilled and trained athletes who work hard and get into painful situations, let's say it's blisters on your hands, and they will say that they did not notice it, they didn't feel the pain. What is it mentally that's actually going on there that it must have hurt? Getting blisters or a burst blister must have hurt, and yet they say they didn't notice it until afterwards.
Yeah, well, I think it's probably that combination of the motivation and the focus. I mean, when you get so in the moment and so focused on what you're doing, so present, that and in tune with what the blade's doing and what your body's doing, as opposed to how your hands are feeling, you don't notice other things. I mean, it is that what they call being in the zone, and being able to function optimally at this point where you're just so in tune with what's going on around you that you don't always notice things like a blister popping. And so I think it's just being incredibly present with what you're doing, that gets you through those times, and you don't even notice some of those adversities that might.
Is that the same skill that sees people through the pain, or does that come later?
Yeah, no, I think it's both. I mean, the pain is, I think, more about the training that you do, and understanding the training that you're doing, and that understanding that when you race, it doesn't get easier and the pain's going to go away miraculously because you're racing. I think it's, again, a huge amount of awareness that you get out of training that translates or transforms itself into racing. But if we kind of train obliviously to it, I don't think we ever develop that real racing capacity, because we haven't sort of been in tune with what the training's doing for us, if that's making any sense.
It makes perfect sense. Now, there's another question we've got on a similar topic, which is from Elizabeth, who's in Rochester, New York. She says, rowing can be a painful sport. What techniques do you offer athletes for setting the pain aside during a metered test or a race?
Well, again, I think this is very much about our race plans, or having some kind of structure to get us through erg sessions, erg tests, and races. And I don't mean just get through. I mean be really effective in those moments. So tangible cues. So it's basically positive self-talk. So what we can do in training, especially on really tough training days, what's our internal dialogue? What's the voice in our head telling us the good stuff and the not so good stuff? So we can push out the good stuff and listen. So when you've done a really good 1,000-meter piece, and you noticed at the end of it that you were really concentrating on picking it up at the front end and really pushing with the legs or whatever, that might become your cue. So the next time you do it, it's like, oh, I really got to remember that front end, because that really just set everything up. I just felt so good. And the thing is, we walk away. This is why journaling and writing in diaries becomes so important, because we walk away from so many of those great training moments, not, again, being aware or necessarily acknowledging or noticing what some of those details are, some of those little things that really made a difference. And then you can take that information and help it can help inform a race plan, whether it's a self-race plan or a crew race plan. And so you can have little cues. So like I said earlier, when I knew that as I came into the third 5 of a 2,000-meter race, my posture is going to go. So I had my own cue. I didn't say it out loud to the crew in our 4, but I would say it to myself, because I had to sit up. I just knew I had to maintain my posture. Otherwise, I'm not finishing the race very effectively. And I'm not going to be very effective for the crew. So I think helping push through, whether it's the pain and holding technique, having very tangible, real cues, whether they're single words or very, very short phrases, but it's a real conscious effort. We really have to think about this and think about it in training, and then let it help form a race plan for us later on. It just doesn't happen. We think in the moment, oh, how will I forget that? And then a week later, you're doing the same workout. It's oh, what did I do last week? So if we can come away from training and, as I say, log stuff down and write little bit down, even if it's just bullet points, it doesn't have to be great, big, long, beautiful sentences or anything, just bullet points to capture the workout, capture some of those cues. Yeah, that really worked. Okay, let's do it again. Oh, that seems to be really something that works for me. I'm going to use that in my next erg test, or I'm going to use that in the next race I do.
That's great. Now, a question from John, who's in Oxford in the UK at Falcon Rowing Club, and he says, how do you respond to the assertion that racing can constructively be approached as a performance comparison with other crews rather than a competition? So he says, to what extent do outside factors like your opponents affect your performance?
Yeah, so, I mean, at the end of the day, rowing, unless you're doing a head of the river race or something against the clock, for the most part is side-by-side racing. So we're always going to have those external factors around us when we're racing, across lanes. So whether it's in training or on race day, it's a balance between our self preparation and our self delivery, as well as acknowledging the people around us. If it was just against a clock, then you can afford to be more internal, and you've got your race plan, and that's what you're gonna deliver. But the reality of any side-by-side racing is you have to notice there's tactics involved. So you need to be able, especially if you're a coxie or a bow person, be able to look out and at a glance and gather information very, very quickly and be able to communicate that back to the crew. So we're never going to escape it. So I think if we can find ways, particularly in training, to make people feel comfortable with that side-by-side performance comparison, it is competitive. That's sort of the nature of the sport, but again, framing it in a way that we do this to make us better racers. We sit side by side in training and do some of that comparative stuff to normalize racing, to make it familiar that when we come to race day, oh yeah, this is normal. This feels good. I'm ready to do this. And we don't get completely overwhelmed by the boats next to us, especially as you're going down the course. you just notice it for information, and then you take that information and you learn to respond, particularly as a crew, to take it up a beat or two if that's what you need to do, or hold something, or counterattack, or whatever the tactics are. But I think there's nothing. It's always going to be there. So it's how we create a mentality and a perspective that this is part of rowing and racing, and using that information effectively rather than being sort of scared of it or distracted by it.
There's a question from a listener who says, in a previous rowing chat, the interviewee, who is a coxswain, who's at Chelsea Donut, she spoke about performing alongside the opposition rather than competing against them. What's your comment on that as a psychologist?
I presume she means in a race?
Yes, she does,
situation.
Yes.
Well, racing is racing. You want to be the first past the post, really, don't you? I mean, it's how you hold on to your performance and make that really the number one priority. But also, you know, if a boat starts to move away from you, being able to respond, to go with them, and ideally go with them and then maybe go past them, you know. So it's, you got to do both, really.
So it's a balance.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, first and foremost, it's your process. I mean, you're in control of what you can do first and foremost. And then the secondary bit is being able to be tactically aware of what's going on around you, and then have the ability to respond because you've practiced it in training to different race circumstances. So at the end of the day, it always comes back to you and what's in your control and what you can do, what you want to do. But just not in the absence of noticing what's going on around you.
There's a follow-up question. He says, I accept the idea of tactics, but do they really reduce the time it takes for a crew to complete the course?
I don't know about the time it takes to complete a course. I guess I think about it more as the first boat across the line, kind of thing. They might do. It might slow them down, but the whole fleet might slow down if everyone's doing bursts here and there and trying to outrace each other.
Yeah. Right, we've got a last couple of questions. Rob has asked, what are your thoughts on the drive sequence? More overlap with the legs, back and arms, or more of a push with the legs first and then you're back after the legs are down?
Oh my goodness, I think you're probably not the best person to comment on that. Sorry, Rob.
Fair enough.
It's been a while since I've had those kind of thoughts and discussions. It's probably better for a coach, a more up-to-date coach than me.
And lastly, from Sabina, who's from Karachi Boat Club in Pakistan, and she says, I'm 5 foot tall. How can I gain more power?
Oh my goodness, I think I'm probably, again, not the best person. A physiologist might be a good person to talk to about that. I don't know, but I suspect sculling and rigging your boat to suit your size and to make sure you look at all those sorts of details will maximize what you're capable of. Actual power is probably something more for as I say, a strength and conditioning coach or a physiologist to look at.
There's some things for you to work on, Sabine. So, Kirsten, thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant. You have very kindly donated a prize for the monthly prize draw, which is drawn from all of the subscribers of the Rowperfect UK newsletter list. The newsletter goes out once a week, and at the end of the month, we have a random selection from our subscriptions, which is genuinely random. It's run out of the FeedBlitz system that powers the email. And you've donated a copy of a book.
Yep, it's Volker Nolte's Rowing Faster, the second edition, serious training for serious rowers, in which everything you've just heard me speak to is in the book. So I did a chapter for it. So I've got a copy here. That I will pass on to the lucky winner.
Fantastic. And perhaps you could autograph it too.
I will do.
Now, how can people follow you and find out about you and what you're writing and doing online? Well,
not a whole lot, I'm afraid. I don't do a whole lot online. I mean, I'm associated with the Canadian Sport Institute Pacific, so there's stuff sort of on our website and things through their website that are related to what I'm doing.
And if a listener has a question, are you happy to field questions by email afterwards?
Sure. Yep, no problem.
Fantastic. Kirsten, thank you so much. It's been a complete delight. I'm so glad we decided to do sports psychology, and thank you for fantastic insights. Firstly, for yourself professionally as a sports, a mental performance consultant. But secondly, your angle on rowing and the peculiarities of our sport is really, really helpful for all of us who are club level athletes and coaches and coxswains, because we now have got some tools that we can put into practice tomorrow when we're next at the boathouse.
Great. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.